I'm going to start with a quote this morning by Joseph Campbell. It says, "We must be willing to let go of the life we had planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us." So today I want to talk about bravery. What do you think about when you think about being brave? When have you been brave in your life? What factors call forth your courage, and what's in play when you are squelching your bravery? It's an interesting subject because when we have the intention of letting go of the life that we had planned and the one that we've been living, and we let Spirit's visions with us decide where we're going to go, bravery is required, isn't it? Because Spirit thinks big, we're free to sit in our comfort. We're free to sit in our discontent if we want to. But we are always and we're persistently called by that Spirit of life within us to step out and live in a bigger way. It's what's happening all the time. I talked a little bit about bravery a few weeks ago when I was describing having the courage to go on what I called my hero's journey and move to Seattle. When I left everything familiar for me and I went out there, I had to be brave, and some people will say it was the bravest thing that I had ever done. And Ellen, in her reading last week, mentioned The Wizard of Oz in courage and this archetypal presence of the inward cowardly lion who needed courage. That represents our inner self-doubt, and we all have it. He's in the story because we have this universal doubt that we have what it takes to live our lives fully, to go on our own yellow brick road of self-discovery. He was looking for the wizard to give him courage, but he found that he had it deep inside of himself, and that's where it is for all of us as well. And Susan, in your talk last week, she emphasized that when we try to learn to live a spiritual life, it requires a lot from within us to make good choices, doesn't it? She talked about the prevalence of addiction and those behaviors that we use to distract and numb ourselves. She stressed that all of us could be in recovery from something. And I loved her talk because it set me up perfectly for today. Because to admit that we're powerless over something in our lives and that's made our life unmanageable, that admission requires bravery. And it's when we stop numbing ourselves that we find the courage to discover how truly magnificent we really are, right? Each of us has that unique purpose that no other person on the planet can fulfill. And if we choose to ignore our purpose, to live small or to numb ourselves, not only are we missing out, but the whole world is missing out on what we've come to do and be. So Brene Brown is probably the leading teacher right now on the subject of courage. Her entire life work is to encourage human beings to what? Live authentically, be vulnerable, be engaged, and live powerfully as an individual. And in her book, Braving the Wilderness, she explores this idea that we're all working with to fit in, but also to be an individual and be true to ourselves. She gives this quote by Maya Angelou that I want to share. Maya said, "You're only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all." Belonging is such an important part of being human, right? Because in the absence of love and belonging, there is suffering. We're tribal creatures, so fitting in is necessary for our survival. However, sometimes we lose our individuality. We lose our dignity and our strength by forcing ourselves to assimilate to the groups that we're in. We stay in our homeland when we think we must belong to survive, and many people never adventure out into authentic living. And when we step out into the unknown, when we go find our individuality and our authenticity, we're truly going into this wilderness that Brene talks about, and most of us haven't explored that. We step out into our path of spiritual awakening, and we realize we don't have to belong any one place because we belong everywhere. You know, I had that experience myself growing up. You know, some of you already know, some of you don't, but some know that I was raised in this fundamentalist, authoritarian religious group. And sometimes I actually call it a cult. Because everything about our experience was to exist in this group, to fit in and not step outside of it. You know, we were told that heaven was our prize if we would stay aligned with everything, we stayed obedient, and hell was our punishment if we left, if we thought for ourselves. There was this wicked wilderness out there, and people who left the group never returned, right? It was this extreme experience of forced belongingness and a denial of individuality. But I trust that you can relate to it at some level, on some level, of trying to fit in. It took great courage when I was 18 to leave the group, to leave my family. I literally didn't return or see any of those people for 25 years. When my aunt died and I went to a funeral, I finally saw those people again. I had to give myself permission to leave and find my true identity, to go on my journey of self-discovery and awakening spiritually. See, I grew up thinking that belonging meant belonging to a certain group of people. But I've since learned that belonging means feeling at home in my own skin and gathering to me people who appreciate who I am in my own skin, being myself, right? It's all about trust. Trusting myself and trusting others. Learning to trust others is what I had to do, because both of those things took me a long time to do. Learning to trust myself and learning to trust others. But eventually I woke up and I found the courage to live authentically me. So this morning I want to share Brene Brown's acronym, BRAVING. We're going to take this one letter at a time. So if you want to take notes, you can take notes. But let's see what it takes to be brave enough to trust yourself and to trust others around you in this wilderness of spiritual awakening and the unknown of life. So first letter in the word braving is B. B stands for boundaries. So when you go out into the wilderness to find your authentic self and your power, you have to know, where do you begin and where does everyone else begin and end, right? What is mine internally and externally, and what is someone else's, right? So boundaries must be set and be held so that you can find space enough to find yourself and your personal preferences and your own needs. Boundaries are about deciding what others can do and what others can say in your presence and what they can't. Boundaries are also about respecting other people's boundaries and understanding that sometimes staying physically distant is the only way to maintain the appropriate space for individual growth to occur. You know, I know for me, I set a boundary between myself and the people I grew up with, including relatives. And I held that boundary for years and years, no phone calls, no contact whatsoever. I simply didn't trust them to respect my space and my personal choices and what I had discovered about myself. But after 25 years of holding that boundary, I suddenly realized I could be around those people with compassion without being triggered by their presence. I could do it. Their opinions and their judgment really wouldn't pierce through my boundary. So space and distance were necessary until suddenly they weren't. I knew I was strong enough to renegotiate the edges of my life to encircle them again. So now I'm Facebook friends with many of them, and actually some of them have come here to kind of see what my spiritual path is about. So remember that boundaries don't always have to be permanent, but they must stay in place until you're strong enough to not need them anymore, right? Until you're not overly influenced by their opinions and their thoughts about and their approval, actually. So you can renegotiate boundaries when you're more secure in yourself. So honor your boundaries and the boundaries of others. So B is for boundaries. The next letter is R. R is for reliability. And R reminds us that reliability is key to building trust, not only with yourself, but with internal trust and external trust. So as you're learning to be brave on your life journey, you're going to learn the importance of saying what you mean and meaning what you say. You become reliable not only to yourself, but to others. And it takes great bravery to be impeccable with your word. It's one of the 4 agreements, isn't it? Reliability breeds trust. So think about the person you trust the most. Just think about them for a second. It's probably because you know that when they tell you something, you can depend on them to follow through with their words, or they'll communicate with you again, right? It's reliability. So when you're discovering who you really are, your truest identity, pay attention to the words you say that you would never intend to keep. You know, when you accept an invitation that you know you're really not going to go, right? Or you say you'll help, but you know you're not going to help, right? So betraying yourself and others is never life-affirming. So when your words aren't real, you're not trusting yourself, and others are not trusting you either. So when you make a promise, value that and keep it, especially to yourself. So much of our self-esteem has to do with breaking our word with ourselves, right? I ache when I hear someone say, I don't trust myself with that, because I understand what that means. That means that they haven't been reliable and they don't trust themselves to hold certain what's for them and what's not for them. And if you don't trust yourself, no one else is going to trust you either. So the journey towards self-knowledge, on that journey, reliability is really, really important. So boundaries, reliability, and then A is for accountability. So our teaching, this teaching is all about accountability, all about accountability. When we enter a world of spiritual teaching, we soon learn that we are responsible for the quality of our lives and the quality of our relationships, right? We're responsible for our thoughts, our choices, and our words. And accountability is stepping up and really looking at the part you play in any scenario that you're in. Accountability is issuing meaningful apologies and then not repeating the behavior. It's about understanding that we're all complicated beings with the capability of behaving as our strongest selves in any situation, but also our shadow selves, our less developed selves. Those might show up as well. And accountability is owning everything you are and learning to work with all of yourself, right? We hate making mistakes, but admitting them is even harder than making them. Our character development is about owning our mistakes and then moving beyond them. It isn't a character flaw to make a mistake, but it can become a character flaw if we don't own and learn from the mistakes that we've made. So the next letter is V, and Brene Brown uses the word vault for this letter. Vault is a symbolic word for keeping confidences and holding information. You know, so when you're learning to trust yourself and building trust with others, you begin to recognize what is yours to share and what is not yours to share. You know, sometimes you're given access to information that's for you only and for your current stage of development, right? Spirit will give you access to information, but it's not information that necessarily is meant to be shared with other people. So we learn to put in our vault those things, those powerful pieces of information which have been entrusted to us. It's a wonderful feeling when someone trusts us enough to be vulnerable and honest about something, isn't it? You know, think about how it feels when you are the person that's chosen, when someone wants to trust you with their hurt or their story or their pain or their shame, you know? So do you have an inner vault that's built to contain that kind of information? You know, maybe you're in a profession where you've been trained to do it, but all of us have to learn how to hold a vault of information. Because belonging, and if you're going to belong wherever you go, belonging is being built on that foundation of trustworthiness, and also this sense of individual and self-worth. Here's the deal. When you've betrayed the trust of someone else, it's very hard to stay in the relationship based on trust. So stay accountable for your vault. Boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault. The next letter is I. I is for integrity. So my definition of integrity is when everything is lined up. What you think about, what you believe, what you say, what you feel inside yourself, and the actions that you take. They're all reflecting one thing. And part of this journey is learning to honor ourselves. And when we do, we begin to adjust to greater and greater integrity. Don't you notice sometimes when something's not aligned, like you're saying one thing, it just kind of betrays what you feel, or you know that this is not exactly right, but you're doing it anyway, you're just not in your integrity. Integrity is about cleaning up these misalignments in our lives. You know, values are a big part of integrity, staying in integrity with your values. Somewhere in my wilderness journey of self-discovery, in one of my many classes that I took, I was asked to narrow my values down to 3. Have you ever been asked to narrow your values? Mine were narrowed down to 3. And for me, mine were freedom, fulfillment, and abundance. And some of you know those are my 3 words. But when I was growing up the way I did, there was no freedom to be found. I didn't feel fulfilled in the teachings at all, and abundance was really not available to me. So if I was going to get into alignment, into integrity with my core values, I couldn't stay there. There was no way I could stay there. So I had to be brave enough, I still have to be brave enough, to leave situations where my values aren't there. So figure out what your values are and stay in integrity with them as you go on your journey. The N in braving is for non-judgment. Stop judging. Stop judging. When you go out into this wilderness to find yourself, you've got to focus on you, on yourself, and not everyone and everything around you. You know, everyone's on their own journey. Everyone's on their own path to spiritual awakening, or awakening in general. And people are drawn into your life to show you about your own journey. Not about theirs, but about your own. So substitute judgment with curiosity. Ask yourself, if this person and their behavior have a purpose for being here, what is it? What is it? How can I allow them to help me learn more about myself? Are they here for me to love them? Or are they here to love me? Most likely it's both, because if they're there. But I can only control myself and my love, right? Judgment is how we push things away from ourselves. So if we can stay in non-judgment and be curious, we have the opportunity to learn about whatever's around us. And the last letter is G. G is for generosity. That's what Laine said G is for. Generosity is about sharing whatever you have with other people. You know, usually we think of generosity in terms of tangible things, but sometimes the things that we are most generous with are things that are intangible. If you have more experience than someone else, generously share your experience with others. If you have more insight, bring that insight into the benefit of the whole. If you're blessed with abundance of compassion or willingness or whatever, generously share that every chance you get. The journey into self-awareness is always going to lead you to make an assessment of what your gifts are, what are your blessings. And it's a part of the journey to see where we can share those with other people. Ernest Holmes, the founder and our teacher, says, the greatest gift life could have made to you is yourself. You are a spontaneous, self-choosing center in the great drama of being, the great joy of becoming, the certainty of eternal expansion. So when I went on this journey at age 18, when I moved to Seattle at age 33, and when I moved down here at 53, these big changes called for me to bravely reassess my life and to figure myself out. I had to discover myself, which is what Ernest Holmes says is our greatest gift. Through our acts of generosity, we step fully into community and a sense of belonging right where we are. But that takes courage and bravery. It takes authenticity and vulnerability. It takes the courage to be visible and present as your greatest self. Marianne Williamson said, each of us has a unique part to play in the healing of the world. So my talk title today is Braving Your Life. You brave your life by being respectful of boundaries, yours and everyone else's, by being reliable, by holding yourself accountable, by creating and maintaining your vault of confidentiality, by living in integrity with your values, by practicing non-judgment and staying curious, and by knowing yourself and sharing yourself generously. How brave are you willing to be to step out and step into your magnificent? That's what we're here for. The world needs you. So step out of your comfort zone and step up into what you have come here to be and do it bravely. And so it is.